On behalf, thanks, Caitlin. On behalf of MCUHO, we would like to welcome you to today's, I guess, lunch and learn or lunch and chat or lunch and discuss, whatever we're going to call it. Looking at it, meet me in the middle, insights from mid-level professionals. And we have some amazing people that we will introduce here in just a minute. So first, my colleague and I, we are the MCUHO mid-level engagement coordinators. And so putting this together was something that she and I got to do. My name is Jen Ciascio. I am the Senior Associate Director of Residence Life at Penn State at the University Park campus. And I'll let my colleague introduce herself.
Thanks, Jen. I'm Caitlin Lenker. I'm the Director of Residential Life at Lebanon Valley College. That's located in Annville, Pennsylvania, for those of you not familiar with the institution.
Thank you. And we want to know who you are. So if you can put your name and title, if you are comfortable doing so, in the chat, so that we can kind of see who the folks are that we are speaking with today. We would love that. So obviously Caitlin and I might chime in some, and we hope that all the participants will jump in. And as we start asking questions, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put things in the chat, and we will work to definitely make sure that you are heard. But we have three amazing panelists, which is what I'm excited to hear. We have Monica Carson, Nyela Brown, and Andre Colbreth. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and a little bit about their role at their institution. So Monica, let's start with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monica Carson. I utilize she, her pronouns over at Lehigh University in scenic Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We're right next to Allentown for people who may not be familiar with the area. Currently serve as the Associate Director of Residence Life. Lehigh is a private institution, small to mid-size. We have about 7,000 students, 5,000 undergrad. We are primarily a residential campus. About 70% of our students live on campus. And then we also dominate the Southside Bethlehem community as well. So that is my name, and I'm at Lehigh.
Thanks, Monica. Nyela, how about you next?
Awesome. Good afternoon. My name is Nyela Brown. I am at Temple University serving as the Assistant Director of Residence Life and Operations. We are, mid-sized institution as well, about 5,000-ish on campus. We do, however, we have enrolled most of Philadelphia. I think we are the second largest in Philadelphia. And so we have a bunch of students, but more so commuting, about 5,000 on campus. And my role is pretty much supervision of some resident directors, overseeing the operational pieces of the department, those kind of things. So, hey, we're in Philly.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. And Andre, last but not least.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andre Colbreth, and I am the Interim Assistant Director for Equity and Inclusion / Area Coordinator at Penn State University Park's campus. So I'm responsible for the development and implementation of equity and inclusion initiatives to support our residence life program, not just at University Park, but across the Commonwealth. We have 11 residential campuses. My role at University Park as an area coordinator, I support the Northwest, Whitehorse, and Nittany Lion Inn residential areas on campus. So we have anywhere from first-year students all the way to graduate students and their families. And yes, I said their families. We have little dependents, little ones, all the way up to some of our elders in the community here at University Park. Here at University Park, we house about 14,500 students as of now, but once we complete our renovations, we're looking to expand that number a much higher. I'm glad to be with you all today.
Thank you. Thanks to all three of you. So obviously, Caitlin and I might, we are the leaders, but we are going to chime in every once in a while. Our panelists, we do have a number of questions that we are going to pose, but if you are a participant, please feel free to raise your hand or put stuff in the chat. We have questions and we will start with those, but if we go another direction, then we are happy to go there if we need to have a conversation about specific things, okay? All right, I'm gonna hand it off to Caitlin.
Thanks, Jen. And just as a housekeeping item, as we get started, some of you will notice that this webinar is being recorded. This will be posted to Makuho's website later on. So if you would prefer to have your video off, or you are welcome to do whatever you want to do as part of that. We just want to bring it to your attention that this is being recorded. So first question for the panelists: what have been the best opportunities or benefits for mid-level professionals at your specific institution? And whoever wants to answer, feel free to answer. If you all want to answer, however you guys want to manage that question.
I'm happy to start off on this question. So again, I'm Monica Carson at Lehigh University. I am still, as most of us are, just navigating out of the last 17, 18 months we have had with COVID and everything. One thing I have valued coming out of working in a virtual era is just the institution being able to provide that flexibility of us navigating our way from the virtual space to the office space. So right now, folks have the option to be home for a couple of days and then be in the office. Obviously, with Res Life, we function in an in-person capacity. Given the current population that we have, some of our students didn't have the opportunity to go to prime and graduate. So we're having a lot of more mental health crises this year than we have seen in the past. I know we talk about mental health often in the field, but just the university being able to provide that opportunity to say, hey, Monica, you can work from home 2 days a week, or feel comfortable coming later if you want to start your day at home. As someone who is currently in a supervisory role, it allows me to adjust myself and just have that opportunity for self-care that we speak about often, whether it means waking up a little later to start my day and then finishing it virtual in spaces where I feel comfortable. And I know oftentimes it may not directly correlate to mid-level, but I think in this moment, as we transition back in, that's given me a lever to show up more and be present for my peers, my supervisees, and also my students.
I think I'd have to agree. Along the same vein, I think it's been the spaces that I've been able to occupy. And one of those spaces has been to sit on the a divisional committee to talk about returning to work and what that looks like, and being realistic about folks' expectations as employees, but also running this business of the university, right? And so we were able to talk about what it means to have a family. I mean, I started here 3 days before we went home for the pandemic. And at that point I had a 5-month-old. And so now he's 1.5 and I've been home with him for his entire life. And so it's hard to just say, I'm gonna go back five days into the office, and being realistic about that, but also what it means for some positions that don't really have the opportunity to work from home, right? Some of our other essential staff that don't have that opportunity. So being able to give voice to that, and I know that there are some times where we feel like we don't have the opportunity to voice the concerns of others, and being able to sit at that table to advocate for others and bring their experiences to create a more equitable and boost morale in our department and in our division, I think was really important to me. I would also say throughout the pandemic and in general, right, I'm now able to occupy spaces and meetings where my director should be sitting, right? Because he can't be everywhere all the time. And with a lot of changes in our structure, I've been able to fill in, and knowing that I'm trusted to represent the department in that way is a great opportunity. Knowing that it sharpens my skills, right, to make sure that I'm on the same page and I'm in the know about what our students need, what our staff need, but also what direction we're moving into, has been really helpful and really beneficial to learning how to navigate mid-level.
I really like what you said about giving voice to, and I think that's for me, that's been the one of the greatest opportunities, is to give voice to the concerns of those that are in the residence life coordinator position, and to also give a voice to the decisions that have been passed down from senior leadership. And so when you're in this role as a mid-level manager, you have to balance both of those worlds, because you can't say, well, they said this, because you are a part of the they, you are a part of leadership. And you can't, throw your people under the bus, or they said this and this is how they feel. You want to be strategic about that. The other thing that I think is a great opportunity for me is to be able to flex a muscle that you may not often you may not be able to operationalize that often, and that's like strategic thinking. Actually thinking about the decisions that you're making right now to appease some of the people, but how it will impact the program, how it will impact all of, what will be the long standing, how it will impact your colleagues that work aside you in the division. And so I think those opportunities, like strategic thinking and giving voice to both senior leadership decisions and to the concerns of those that are in the entry level positions, or office managers, staff assistants, those kinds of things. I think those are great opportunities for professionals that are at the mid-level part of their career.
Awesome. Thank you so much, panelists. I think we're ready for the next question. So next question, what have been the biggest challenges experienced by mid-level professionals at your institution? We just asked you to talk about some of the opportunities that you've experienced, but what have been some of those challenges, maybe for yourself, but also for potentially some of your colleagues at your institution?
I will kick us off. I have two. So I think specific to COVID, it is, like I said, I began 3 days before we started in the office. And so getting to know the folks that I supervise, building relationships with campus partners, all of that was so much harder to do. And on the other side of that is Temple is known for keeping people, and folks don't leave and they stay. It's a really great place to work. And if you know anything about folks in Philadelphia, your great grandmother probably lived down the block, and your grandfather probably lives around the corner. Like your families are invested in the area. And so generations live here. So people don't leave. So what happens when you come to a new institution and you are kind of new to the city and new to this institution? Folks don't really trust you. And so in order to navigate the politics and to be strategic, right? Like what Andre said, like you need to have those relationships built. And it's hard to build, number one, in a pandemic, but also when you're new to the institution, to get people to trust you and to trust your vision and where you're trying to push things to the next level. I think it's been the biggest challenge that I've been noticing here, and getting people kind of to not be stuck in their ways because they've just been here for so long.
I think down that same line in terms of relationship development, the structure we have at Lehigh, we have our entry-level positions, which ideally most of them supervise paraprofessional staff, so student staff. The next level up would be your professionals, the mid-level professional who then supervise the entry-level professionals. So there's no transitional point of a person entry level, somewhat having a pseudo supervision experience with a professional staff before navigating into a full-on supervision role. And at times that have created conflict for the mid-level professionals at Lehigh, because ideally you could be promoted and be supervising your colleagues, right? So that relationship transitional point, oftentimes folks will struggle with that. And people have been quite friendly in providing the support, but still being able to set those boundaries, going from hey, we were just in the same position doing the same work and now I'm your supervisor, being able to set expectations and just garner that support across the board. We also don't have a large chunk of mid-levels here at Lehigh. The structure provide a very small cohort of folks, so that support network also at times don't exist, contingent upon the department that you're in. I think within the division of the Dean of Students office, we are pretty close-knit, but outside of that, there are some issues in connecting with mid-levels on the academic side or mid-levels in different sector of the institution. But that is one of the biggest challenges we have, is that navigation from not supervising professional to then being instantly responsible for supervising a group of 4, 5, 6 of your peers.
I would say one of the biggest challenges I think I experienced at my institution is not feeling like you're a glorified residence life coordinator that just moved up and you still have the responsibilities of a regular coordinator with an RA staff. Those kind of those nuances, and so like really getting to the table with all of the leaders in your in the unit, and making it known that you have developed an expertise in a specific area, and whatever that area is, everybody has an area of expertise, and don't let anybody tell you anything different. You just have to hone it and develop it a little more. But I think that is one of the biggest challenges, especially when you're at a large research institution. You know, there's so many voices at the table, and so making sure that you're advocating for the, I want to say, the most appropriate things or the most important things that are impacting your people, your area, the people that you're supervising, those kinds of things. Um, not really. Oh, I have to backtrack. You have to recognize that you can't fight every battle, right? You got to pick your battles when you're in this when you're in this role. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is, for me at least, and for my peers, is not feeling like a over glorified coordinator and letting people know like, hey, I have an area of expertise. I have something that I can lend to the table. I too would say that it all boiled down to gaining the trust of your peers. And it's a word that I didn't think that I would be using as much, but you can ask Jen Ciascio. We talked about trust. It seemed like we talked about trust so much over the last year, and how it's so important and critical to building and sustaining a relationship as a leader over a group of your peers that you may have once were working with alongside. And so how do you maintain that trust and also enhance it a little more so they recognize that you are advocating for them, as well as your peers at the table, whether central leaders or other senior leaders are trusting you to make sure that you have the best interest for the unit when you're advocating at the table.
And Andre, I will even add to that, we've been having those same conversations over here. Usually with trust comes the transparency piece of, I'm trusting you, and basically all I want is transparency along the way as we're navigating our way through policies and procedures. Due to COVID, we have had to change a lot of things, and oftentimes the folks, especially our entry-level employees, get the information at the last minute when we could have been more upfront in the beginning to make them aware of, here are the 3 possible outcomes, just so folks aren't surprised when the final decision is made. So I think that trust and transparency go hand in hand.
Thank you, panelists. We also saw the question came in the chat. Thank you, Ariel, for that question. And Nayela, I saw you already answer that. So thank you very much for that. Anything else to add about this before we move on to the next question? Okay. All right. I know we've talked a lot about COVID. I know all of you have talked about COVID in your responses to the previous 2 questions. And so in some ways you've already answered this, I'm sure, but how has COVID changed the mid-level manager role at your institution, if at all?
I have to go back to what or a comment that Nayela made at the beginning in terms of being able to step in for your director, for your supervisor. I think that is a major change I have seen with COVID at Lehigh. Roles, responsibilities have, additional responsibilities have been added onto a lot of our plates. My supervisors is having to be at tables for his supervisor, which is removing him from traditional tables that he has been at. So I've been able to step in. So just having to fill in along the way. And as someone who is now a decision maker in a department, is giving me a better insight into the university and how things function, which then allows me to be a better supervisor for my supervisees, and being able to come back and say, hey, I have some rationale as to how we landed here. And here's the info that I have. And it goes back to that transparency piece I was talking about. As changes are happening due to COVID, budgets are being decreased. And as we're going through budget reduction, being able to say, okay, this is the reality, but here's where we actually need to land. I'm seeing that people are buying that transparency, which then leads to them being able to trust the process and also being willing to participate in the process or things that we have to coordinate.
I would say for me, I didn't have the opportunity to, with all the major decisions that were coming down the pipe for what we were doing as a university. I didn't have a role in sitting at the table and advocating for our people. Sometimes our director and the rest of us leaders in the department, we would be in a meeting and a decision was made and it came out at the same, we all got the same email at the same time. And so we're all reading it at the same time. But for me, what COVID has allowed me to do was really focus more on my staff holistically when I think about it, and not necessarily the operations of residence life, because we were going to do what the university charged us to do anyway, and that was like protecting and providing a service to the students, but recognizing that my staff was experiencing this as well. My staff had loved ones that they were focusing on and fearful for and all those other kinds of things, and so I leaned a little more into my sphere of influence, is like supporting my staff in a way that I don't think I was able to support them before when we were quote unquote normal and back up into running and that those kinds of things, because the operation took over or pretty much everything prior to COVID. But I would say like supporting my staff and leaning on my staff and showing them that vulnerable side of me is what COVID made me, and I would say some of my peers that are mid-level managers do at my institution.
My job wasn't my job. It just wasn't that at all. I have been joking since last week. We just moved our students in that it feels like this is my first day and I get to finally do my job. It was not, my job was COVID. My job was to create templates about how we are going to, what are we going to send to students? It was, we need to come up with a process to check students into quarantine and isolation processes, housing. It was nothing but making sure that we all stayed afloat, and my side of campus was shut down. And so checking in on the folks who were on the ground every single day, I would absolutely say it had to ramp up the way that Andre mentioned. It had to ramp up. We had to care more about it and to bring their voices again to the table, because folks were ready to back out. Everyone was scared. And so it changed everything completely. And although we're still going through COVID procedures and creating processes, I think it's changed a little bit more to, I am now able to supervise. I'm able to focus on the operations with COVID in mind, not shaping processes for COVID, which feel very different this year. Stressful is how it changed.
In a way, it kind of put us all at the same level. Like we all had the same knowledge level, whatever CNN, BBC News, Fox News, whatever news station you was watching, we all got that same footage. And so in this space, like no one was an expert unless you were an epidemiologist. But in this space, in terms of what we were doing, like we wasn't really experts. We was trying to like, okay, let's try this out, and and so that is interesting to be placed in a space where everybody has like the same level of knowledge to try to support everybody.
I have been saying this since March of 2020. COVID was the great equalizer in a lot of fields, not just higher education, but like it really was the great equalizer, and also allow some of us to take a pause and reset and rethink about the way in which we do the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up question. Kind of, Nayela, you alluded to this already, but talking about COVID, how is the transition out? I know, Nayela, you talked about how now you're able to develop things with COVID in mind, but not necessarily for COVID. So now, as we're now in a new academic year, how, for all of you as panelists, how is that transition out of COVID or still through COVID, but perhaps not as intense as last year? How is that going, and what is that looking like for all of you?
I think it's still touch and go, right? I feel like I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. We opened up last year and shut down 2 weeks later. I'm still waiting for something to change, because that is how it has been. But I think we did a lot of the hard work together last year of developing what needed to happen to feel safe developing verbiage on and policies and how we're going to enforce things and reflecting on what worked and what didn't work. So I think we can go into this year a little more hopeful about how we're going to operate and how we're going to manage our expectations, the expectations of the students that are going into them, and taking things off of folks' plates. I think we all had to jump in a ton, right, last year. But now we're scaling back of like, we know we don't want this group of people ever having to interact with COVID or Q&I. We know that RAs felt like they were be of this authority and could not connect and build community. And so we know that we don't want them to be the enforcers of mask wearing. We know that's not going to work. But how can we pick up that slack in different ways? So it gave us a little more reflection, a little more insight on how we make this more manageable, I guess, for folks.
Yeah, I agree. Last year we spent the bulk of it as with most people just getting our protocols and procedures in place. I think having had a year at this, coming into this academic year, we're able to focus on creating whatever form of student engagement, student support pieces we can have in place. Whereas last year, we were mostly just treading waters in trying to get to the next day and the day after. But having gone through the process, we already have those protocols in place. We may make minor tweaks and adjustments here and there, but now we're able to support students that are in crisis. We're able to focus on the student piece, which I felt for a year, we couldn't do that because every given second, something new was coming. The CDC was releasing something was being updated. So we're in this consistent protocol update type of mood.
Like the both of them said before, we've taken the responsibilities off of our staff's place. We now have a Q&I staff. We kind of ramped up that operation, and that was no easy feat. Like our residence life coordinators, they did the hard work in the beginning to help us figure out what we needed to do as a university and an operation to support students that were going into isolation and quarantine. I think how it has changed on the other side, coming on the other side, is all the things that we were dealing with before: racism, homophobia, sexism, all of those things were still there. And now we have the additive of to wear a mask or to not wear a mask is a political statement. And so how do we support students, and how do we support the parents of those students as our students are entering into the university and we're receiving numerous of phone calls and emails about, I don't want my child in this room with this non-vaccinated person, or I don't want my child in the room of this Black person. And so it seems like it's like going back to a normative state for us. COVID is a part of that normative state for us. And so everything that they said before, we are feeling it in the same way here at University Park and around the Commonwealth as well.
Thank you, panelists. I think we're going to skip the next question and then go, I think, to question 5. So how do you successfully manage up? Basically, how are you successfully managing working with those you report to? You've talked about your experiences as in this mid-level role, but how do you basically manage up?
I think supervision is a two-way street, and I always say that. And so I tell my supervisor what I need. What are my expectations and what I need. I don't look to her and them, because I have multiple supervisors. I don't look to them to be to read my mind. I tell them this is what I need. And in reflections, I think something I do without saying it is, if I see that if what I need from them is an area of struggle, then I figure out a way that I can help them out. Let me help you help me. Okay, because this is how this is gonna be you're gonna have the best of both worlds when you do what I need you to do to help me support my staff, or to help me develop more as a mid-level manager. I don't want to feel stifled, and I don't want you to feel like I'm stifling you because you gotta do so much for me, but let me help you out. And so that's how I engage those that I report to intentionally.
Go ahead, Monica.
Thank you. To agree with everything you said. I think having expectations and making my supervisor aware along the way how I'm faring. And I try to do this through all components of my job. If I'm working on a project, I'm keeping my supervisor updated. If I'm having issues communicating with specific campus partners, I'm keeping my supervisor updated. But I think those like that conversational piece of here's where I'm at, here's what I need from you, here's how you can support me, need to exist. And I also need to know that about my supervisor as well. I often say, I don't want to, my evaluation shouldn't be the point where I'm learning all of the concerns you have about me, because realistically in successful supervision, you're making me aware along the way. I also then utilize that to manage down, right? Modeling the same behavior for my supervisees. But I think that communication, especially in these times, not just more so from a professional perspective, but I think a lot of us have had the last 18 months to navigate our own capacity when we feel maxed out and things like that. So I'm also letting my supervisor know, like we just did 2 weeks of student staff training, which I led. I'm exhausted. So I'm going to take 2 days to decompress, and then I'll come back and be my wholesome self. But I think people really have to practice that conversational piece and expectation. And also I would make it a little personal as an immigrant, person of color, Black person in this country. I struggle a lot in the beginning to make my supervisor aware of those concerns, because I felt as if I was being too vulnerable or too weak, or it will be seen as a weakness. And now I have learned that it's absolutely okay to let them know, because I need you to know when I'm coming in here, when I'm not myself versus when I am my full self and you can see me functioning.
All of that, all the things. I think the number one thing that stuck out for me was that piece of self-awareness. I gotta learn myself first. I have to know myself and how I'm changing. We are forever changing. It felt different to be removed from every conversation about student affairs for 5 months and then to enter the workforce again with a newborn and working from home. So at some point I had to be honest with, do some reflection with myself, right? Of how am I feeling managing? I'm not able to produce work in the same capacity that I was before I had a baby, right? Because every 2 seconds I'm working around a bottle or a nap time, right? And then had to come to my supervisor and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. I'm not sure. I don't think it's reflecting, the way, it's not a reflection of how I'm working, but here's how it feels to go through the process. You may be getting the final product and feel good about it, but I'm stressed about the process. And so how do we talk through what I need and what your expectations are to make them realistic, but also to include my whole self? Because I'm not just this individual showing up every single day. There's a whole self and a whole life behind me that, especially during COVID, I can't just leave at home, show up, do my job, and go back home. Everything is here as well. So I say that piece of self-awareness has really been key to managing up, especially within COVID. And I don't know how we're ever going to be able to leave that conversation, that piece of the conversation out of it. But knowing yourself is that huge piece.
Yeah, I was just going to add, as y'all were talking, like mid-level is such an interesting thing, because especially at large institutions, like my supervisor is the senior director of the entire Commonwealth of Penn State, and he's still a middle person. So he still has like 2 or 3 layers above him. So I would encourage asking your supervisor, how do you manage up as well? Because I asked my supervisor, like, how do you navigate all of those politics that are happening, especially the past year and a half has been fascinating to watch. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
I think we still have some time. We can take another question, right, Jen? Okay. You are all at the mid-level role. What is something you wish someone had told you before you entered that role, or something you wish you had known about the mid-level experience before you entered it?
I will say, I was told this. I went to a mid-level, I guess like a round table for Makuho one year when I felt like I wanted to move in the step of moving up to mid-level. And so it was just a bunch of folks giving advice about how it felt to be in mid-level and what to prepare for. And one of the things they mentioned was how it felt to manage people. And for me, I was like, okay, folks had some funny stories and all of that. But going into it and having to actualize it every day, and like the folks that have the huge titles, the folks that don't, and navigating people's attitudes, the pettiness, it has been odd to see. You feel like everybody's a professional here, like we all got hired, we all have these amazing skills, and then someone is sending a passive aggressive email or making a funny face because of something that you said, or straight out using, like, calling you sweetheart. Like, there's so many odd things about managing people that I think that I knew they could happen, but I think I held professionals at such a high level in what they're capable of performing, that when it came down to remembering, like, you're still a person who, again, has a life outside of this, and we all come from different walks of life. And so you can't really hide who you are behind the title. I think it was tough to remember that piece. And so I would encourage anyone to really remember that piece of it. Like, people are still people. The same people that you watch on Instagram or you see in Target running around and acting up or whatever it is, like, those are the same people that you work with as well. And although we work at this higher ed institution and we got these roles, folks still got their ways, and you can't expect that everyone will be to operate at that high level that you expect them to.
Yeah. Yes, and yes, some more. I, being in the mid-level role currently, have allowed me to be a much better supervisee. It took me a while to truly understand how I showed up as a supervisee until I got into my supervisory role, having to supervise people. Because at that point, I could see reflections of myself and conversations I've had with my colleagues, or peers in the past, and how those conversations may not be conducive to the overall growth of the department or the work that we're looking to do. So that's the first thing, is just like having to be somebody's supervisor then forces you to reflect on how you exist as a supervisee. And my boss and I have this conversation all the time. I think another tier here, I am at a predominantly white institution. I'm the only person of color in my department. I'm one of the few people of color in the mid-level roles here. So there's also an added layer there in supervising my peers who just haven't had enough exposure to people who look like me supervising them, being aware of my delivery and how I deliver feedback, and at times how, because of the color of the skin color I have, it may come off as one thing to one person and another thing to another person. So I think that's something I wasn't prepared for, and I wish someone would have told me the impact that your identity have on how you engage with people you're supervising, and how they may take feedback, both positive and negative, from you in terms of just who you are, and the added layer and nuances that may not exist to them, or you may not even know. So that's my 2 cents.
I think I wish someone would have told me that you are not only supporting the development of the professionals that you're supervising, but those that may be above you, that are watching you, watching how you engage people, watching how you move through spaces, and you're also managing a lot of personalities. And so all of the things that they said before, how people are moving and shaking in spaces. I wish someone would have told me that. I wish someone would have told me It's something that I say to the people that I supervise. You have to be, and I say this, and I know it will sound like it's like a colloquialism. I tell them, like, don't let people play in your face. People will play in your face all day and act like they don't know the rules. They don't know what is expected, what is appropriate. Hold them to the standard, hold them accountable for their actions and what they do. And so I try to. That's something that I do day in and day out, and I remind those people that I supervise: don't let people play in your face. Don't let me play in your face. Right, the best form of apology is change behavior. And so once you call them to the carpet and hold them accountable for what it is that they're doing, what it is that they're saying, how they're making you feel, um, you can truly begin to see change. And I wish someone had told me that I would be doing all of that in this position.
Yeah. I think another point I quickly want to add to this, we often talk about expectations in conversation, whether with our supervisors, supervisees, but it usually comes from the expectation of like what I expect you or how I expect you to perform in this role. I have now got into a space where I'm applying expectation to the quality of work that we're doing, because I realize that has caused some friction in terms of assigning a staff member a project, that staff member executing the project. The completion expectation from that staff member perspective, my perspective, can be totally different. So I have practiced talking about it in the beginning before the project is assigned. Like, what does a complete product look like for you? How do you know you have executed this thing successfully, so that we can both have that sheer understanding, and then navigating into like, okay, here's what I need you to do and going on from there. Because having not done that before, folks are producing work that they consider quality that wasn't transcribing over to quality for our students and the population that we serve. So it's harder on the back end to come back and say, hey, Susan, you did this thing, and I know you think you did it well, but here's the issue. Having a conversation up front and sets the expectation up, and I have seen it produce more quality because we're all on the same page. And then the added piece is like, how can I support you in getting to this end result that we're looking for?
Thank you all. Anyone else have anything to add? Well, I also saw some comments in the chat as well, so thank you for that too. Okay, and now, like Jen said when we started, we obviously had some questions prepared for our panelists in advance, but we want to turn the questions over to all of you that are in the room and invite you to share your questions through the chat, and we can ask our panelists to answer them.
Hey all, as someone who's been at the entry level for quite some time, I'm curious to hear from y'all, like, what was the toughest part or the hardest transition from going from the new professional to mid-level?
I'm going to answer your question, but it may not directly correlate. So my personal background, I haven't been in higher ed the whole time. I worked in the nonprofit social service sector, supervising professionals and things like that. So the idea of mid-level didn't present to me until I started working higher ed. And I think that's something that's specifically specific to student affairs, the higher ed role. But to directly answer your question, for me, it's really been the transition in supervising people and managing people, managing attitude and things like that. I wasn't ready for that because, again, it's just something I wasn't ready for and how it showed up. I know the generic understanding of supervision, but when you get into the managing attitudes, managing people, managing emotions, because that's what it really gets down to, I wasn't prepared for that. And I think there's a gap that we need to cover, especially as folks are transitioning up in their career, is how do you effectively manage people emotions, the attitude from a holistic perspective and not the traditional professional lens that we look at it through.
I would say the navigation of institutional politics. Like I navigate institutional politics, I believe, very well. But like stepping into the mid-level manager role, I was learning that some people was not playing the game well. They wasn't, but yet they were like the most powerful figures in the room. And it's like, oh, I wish that someone had told me about this, like, I could have at least ran the course on how you at least, I think about Miss Cooper, what she put in the chat about how she wished that she knew that everyone isn't kind and not everyone wants to change or grow. And I do think that that was another hard part for me, is that I can see the potential in something. I'm a visionary. I see the potential in something. You show me a pile of bricks and I see a building. I see a structure or something. And not everybody has that. Not everybody has that ability to do that and see that. And that was hard for me in stepping in to the role, as well as not taking on the task of um, some new um, entry level like professionals. Like, I would just me asking you to do something, I could do it myself. Never mind, don't worry about it. I'll do it. I'll do it faster. And I recognize I had to take a step back to allow others to have those experiences so that they could grow. One of the best advice I received is from one of my dear colleagues who is on the call, named is Dominica Muti. She came to us. She was a graduate student, and I supervised her when I was a coordinator. I supervised her as a QI intern, and she told me, Andre, it's okay. I got it. You trained me well. And it was almost if I didn't trust my own training. And look at her now. She's like my colleague and a dear colleague. So those are some of the experiences that I would say.
I think we
Yeah.
have, oh, sorry, someone, Nayela, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no worries. I was just going to reinforce what you're saying of like that piece of the both of you, the attitude, right? With trying to give people the opportunity. When that's together, when you really just want to say, I really would like to not deal with the attitude, I could just do this task. And you still have to be reflective and take a step back to offer the opportunity, because there is this piece of you need to grow and you need to trust your processes and your skills in how you develop other folks so that they can thrive and be great supervisors to someone else. I think is another piece that that helped me. And I think the other thing is like, what did I even want to do? Mid-level is so many things. You could have a portfolio. It could be about supervising. Like, it could be so many things. And so really using the entry-level generalist position to get your hands into everything and anything that really piques your interest, to see how you feel being tactile with it, working with it, developing ideas around it, critically thinking about it, being strategic, diving into professional development around that topic. Are you getting bored, or does it make you passionate, and do you want to continue moving forward? So use this as an opportunity to really get into those areas. That way you can start to narrow down what you actually want to do. And even in mid-level, there are still very much so ways that I bring, sorry, that's my baby I told you about. There are very much so ways that you get to bring in the things that you're still passionate about, but maybe are not your particular focus in the role that you currently have.
Thank you so much, panelists. I think we have time for one more question. If someone either wants to raise your hand or just start talking or put it in the chat, I think we have time for one more question.
I have one. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Chabero from Penn State University Park. My question is, being in the middle is such a unique place. Is it hard to get lost in the shuffle? Because I think a lot of the focus is at the top and at the bottom. And there you are in the middle. I also kind of see it as like a sidekick to upper management. And I don't mean that, in an offensive way. How do you find your place when you're kind of assisting up and assisting down?
One thing that worked for me was talking openly with my supervisor. There have been times where other directors or something will bypass me and my colleague who are in the same role to go straight to my supervisor, right? Or the folks that are above me. But because we had those conversations about what we really want my experience to be, and how I'm going to develop and what is needed in the department, they would always direct them back down to me. But if you don't have those conversations to lay out the expectations, they're not going to have your back, and then you will get lost in that shuffle.
I think being able to articulate what you're skilled at is important when you're having those conversations with your supervisors and your supervisors, because they will that trust that we talked about earlier, they will trustingly send people back to you. I know for me, like, my supervisor know what I am skilled at and know what, those areas of development, and her supervisor and her supervisor knows those things about me. And so that allows me to not get lost in the shuffle. And what's important is having a good group of colleagues that will ground you, that will remind you, hey, you're losing yourself in this. I need you to pull yourself back. I mean, that's so important, is that you have a good set of friends and colleagues to help ground you. I think that would allow for you not to get lost in the shuffle as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really have to be aware of yourself, while consistently remind yourself why you decided to take the job or to take the role, right? Consider the political climate of the institution that you're at. Again, as someone who didn't start out in student affairs or higher ed, I have a very skewed perspective of the word mid-level and what it truly means, because realistically, when you look at even our vice president of student affairs at Lehigh, he's reporting to someone, right? He has the power to make some decisions, but ultimately he has to report to someone. The president of our university have to go through the board of trustees and other like political climate to make decision. I think oftentimes when we view mid-level, we take away that decision-making power. There are a lot of decisions I can make within my role that can still have change and impart change on the work that we're doing. So I think perspective really matters. And also being able to understand the role that you're doing, why you're doing it, and why you even take on the position. But I have seen colleagues get lost in this feel of like, I don't have the power to make decisions. I can't impart. Yes, you can. Look at your limitations, what you can do. And then what you can do, that's where the advocacy piece come in, working with your supervisors and those around you to bring forth change, or at least make them aware of the concern or changes that need to take place.
I said this earlier, you cannot fight every battle. you can't. And so you have to know what battle you are willing to fight and what you will need to lean on your colleagues for to fight for you, or what you will need to fight along with them. And not say there's a whole, I'm using the word battles. I'm not saying there's a whole bunch of battles in this arena, like mid-level managers, but they are. And so I think those things, people who you find, those people who are constantly pushing against decisions, not necessarily having the context behind why decisions are made, they find themselves burned out real quick and lost in the shuffle. Lost in the shuffle means lost in their own personal feelings, and they don't know how to separate their personal feelings from the actual decision of the institution and why that decision was made and how it will impact the students and impact the staff. And so I think that is important as well too.
Thank you, panelists.
Yeah, so, as we wind down, I want to give everybody a couple of minutes to take a breath before you jump back into whatever comes next in your day. We did want to share, if you're looking for more opportunities to connect with folks, the MCUHO conference is a joint conference between MCUHO and NEACUHO. It's just 6 weeks away. There's a QR code to get to that link, or the website is at the bottom. So we encourage that. There will be some options for some virtual things as well. I know that funding is probably a little tenuous right now for some folks, so keeping that in mind. And if you didn't put your email in already, please feel free to do that if you're looking for ways to connect to folks across the region. That is some of what we are trying to do. We are going to launch a mid-level listserv in the coming weeks so that folks can, we're trying to build a robust community, both in person and virtual, so that we can have a unit of people that can, look out for each other and have conversations like this. So we appreciate it. To our panelists, Monica and Nayela and Andre, thank you so much for giving us some of your thoughts. So appreciated. And Caitlin, thanks for navigating the questions for us. On behalf of Makuho, thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to stay on a couple minutes if folks have other questions or want to connect in a different way. Thank you so much. Have a good Tuesday.
Thank you. Jennifer, if I could make a quick announcement, we do have an associate director of residence life position that is vacant at Lehigh. So as we're having mid-level conversation for folks that are thinking about making the transition or interested, that position should be coming back online later this academic, within the academic year. So hopefully around October. Currently, we're about to re-up a process for our assistant director of Res Life, which is an entry-level position overseeing a first-year residential community. Salary starts in the mid-40s. It is live on with a meal plan. Feel happy to reach out to me if you have additional questions, but just wanted to make that as we transition out of this webinar.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks all. Have a good day.